Right, we're back. And basically I have taken cerulean blue and dropped it in the sky all the way down here. Then I took a dilute mixture of sap green and mixed it in just to get some of these greens that are in the water. I've kept it very light and washy. I wet the whole thing and then I turned it and angled it this way and sprayed it with my little spray bottle so the water would have the appearance of running down here. And now I am taking basically a dirty brush with what was left over in my water, and it happens to make this perfect rock color. If you can't get this with your dirty water, just take the palest wash of burnt sienna. Well, let's try to just mix it for you here. All right, let's take a little bit of burnt sienna. All right, I'm sorry you can't see this palette, but it's porcelain and it's heavy. So if I take burnt sienna and I neutralize the burnt sienna with its complement of, let's say, an ultramarine blue. Take the tiniest bit of ultramarine blue and mix them together. I will get this slightly brownish color, about like that, okay? And then if I want it lighter, let me get the correct brush here. If I want it lighter, all I do is make the wash thinner, add more water. So this is kind of how we're going to do the rocks. So again, that's a mixture of the tiniest bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine. And loads of water. And actually, I think we will go ahead and just paint the whole thing in. No, we're not. We're going to use the darker mix to go in between. So anyway, this is just a initial wash to get you some values on your rocks. So just drop that in. Even these over here, but just blot them back. Okay, we don't want them being as dark. Of course, they're greener. Okay, so we're just going through here and establishing where the rocks are. You don't have to be real careful because all of this area is going to be darker in here. But just to maintain where you know your map of where to paint, we'll go ahead and keep these darker, or keep them separate, and then we'll go in with the darks in a minute. All right, with that. And you notice I have my paper towel handy because we don't want them to get too dark. But that gives us the illusion of the rocks. All right. Okay, so to get this passage here, which is much darker than this up here, we're going to make a mixture of the blue and the green, and that was the cerulean blue and sap green. So we're looking at this mixture. We're taking the sap green, just the tiniest bit, mostly cerulean blue. Here's your cerulean, and see we're getting this pretty little blue-green color here. But in these areas, we want it to be a shade darker because we're always thinking value. Remember, always thinking value. Now I have dried this paper, so it's nice and dry. So what I'm gonna do, I want this sky a little bit brighter blue. So I'm gonna come in with some more cerulean, and I'm going to lay in another wash And then I'm going to drop this darker color. So I'm getting it ready. So I have a darker green here. I have my cerulean blue, and then I'll add the smallest bit of, and you know me, it's probably going to be Payne's Gray, and there it is, to give us this gorgeous dark mixture. Okay, I'm happy with that. All right, so let's get our bigger wash brush and start with our cerulean. And we'll go over, remember we can go over these branches because they are going to be darker. And the foliage is green, so we know that we're okay with a blue underneath color because of the foliage. Because green has blue in it. So we're fine there. So we're just doing another wash here. And you don't have to be very careful, we're just getting it covered. Now we're going to go into the little bit of the blue-green mixture. Again, put it more where we see these reflections here. But we're going to wet everywhere else because we want that to stay wet. We've got a lot more of the green over in here, and that's going to have to be ultimately much darker, but we're not doing that right now. Okay, and we're going in here. First, we're going to keep this traveling this way. Okay, and some of the lighter green in here. Then we're going in here with the darker green, just in between here and there, and adding that shadow. And you know, we don't have to be very careful here, and if it ends up in some place you don't want it, just, you can use a smaller brush than this also. I'm using this brush is really too large for this. Okay, I want this spot in here really dark. Okay, so we're kind of going in between the rocks here, not being very careful. Painting around them. Just try to use the tip of the brush, and you need a brush with a good tip for this, obviously. I'm just giving that illusion of the depth between the rocks. Let it run off the page. I am trying to paint a little looser. It's really hard for me. So I am not a loose painter. But in areas like this, especially in these underwashes, and if it's looking too defined, just blot it back. And then some of this is all darker in here. This whole passage from here is darker. So we're kind of going to mirror. I'm going to go ahead and take it down into that tree, which doesn't matter. And some of this can actually act as the shadow on the rock faces, so that works kind of nicely. Our line, basically, we'll lift him back in a bit. Not right now. Go around that rock, go around this rock. Don't want a harsh line here, so we'll put a few of these waves that are coming this way in here, just so we don't get a hard line. And I think we'll put some of this over in here as well. that. All right, I'm happy with that. And I like the illusion of the rocks in there. We will go back in and darken some of these rocks a bit more. And some of these spaces, but we're going to dry this first. I am going to lighten these rocks just the tiniest bit. That's just with a damp brush, cleaning it off on my paper towel. All right, so that's kind of our that's actually our mid value. And so that we don't get a hard line here, I'm just gonna wet this and keep this all kind of wet, flowing together, because we don't really want hard lines anywhere. So while that's drying, I think I'm happier with the sky, and I think we'll go in and lay in this green. So we'll just start with sap green, and I'm going to use a color called Azo Green, which is green gold. And if you don't have that color, just add a little Gamboge or Nickel Azo Yellow to your green and you'll get that color. So we're going to put that lighter yellow on first. Some up in here, and these just in the background trees, just to define this line a bit. We don't want these everywhere, just where we want some highlights on the trees. And you see how loose I'm doing this? We're keeping all of this very loose. Now we're going to come in while it's still wet, and we're going to drop in some of this sap green and let it all kind of merge together. So let's go on in here. Just give the illusion of some foliage in there. And then we're going to get darker as we go down, but we can't do it right now. See, it's going to, well, it really doesn't matter because it's going to bleed and make a really quite a nice, actually, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Let's just do it. Go ahead and get our shadows in, our reflections rather. That'll be kind of nice. And they're darker over here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in and let them just connect with this reflection. And again, I'm painting right through the tree because it doesn't matter. And these actually come down quite far. And just to soften that, I'm actually going to spray this and let those reflections run a little bit. So actually I'm going to go ahead and drop in that darker green right there, since we're all the way in here already. We did have some green in here, and I'm going to drop that in again into the wet. Okay. Keeping it all nice and loose, and dabbing up anything I don't want. So let's see what happens when we wet that a little more. Let it creep on down to look natural, but then stopping it where I want it to stop. Oh, I like that. That's very pretty. It's a very pretty scene here. Thank you, Anne, for this scene. It's really gorgeous. Okay, you can see my paper's starting to buckle again, which means it's really wet. So if I put this tree in right now, it's going to bleed everywhere. So I'm going to stop and dry this, and we will be back shortly.